Amara's breath caught in her throat as she observed Bimpi's body start to shift and change. The transformation was both mesmerizing and horrifying. Bimpi's limbs elongated and coiled, her skin rippling and changing texture. What had once been a familiar, comforting figure now morphed into a large, sinuous serpent. Bimpi and Amara were inseparable from the time they were children, their bond forged in the quiet corners of their village, where they spent countless hours dreaming and playing. Bimpi was known for her gentle nature and unwavering loyalty, always standing by Amara's side through every hardship. Amara, on the other hand, was a spirited woman who had always longed for a family of her own. As they grew older, Amara's deepest desire to become a mother became more pressing. However, after years of trying, she remained unable to conceive. Desperation took hold of her, and she sought every remedy, every blessing, hoping for a miracle. Despite her struggles, Amara never let go of her hope, though it weighed heavily on her spirit. Unbeknownst to Amara, Bimpi too was deeply affected by her friend's plight. Determined to help in any way she could, Bimpi quietly sought out a solution. She stumbled upon an ancient, mysterious remedy that promised to help a woman conceive, but there was a hidden price. The curse attached to the remedy was severe. The person who took it on behalf of another would transform into a snake every evening until dawn. Without fully understanding the gravity of the curse or its implications, Bimpi decided to take the risk. Her love for Amara and her desire to see her friend's dream fulfilled outweighed any concern she had for herself. The decision was made in secret. Bimpi never mentioned her actions to Amara, hoping that this silent sacrifice would remain hidden forever. From that moment on, Bimpi began to notice strange changes within herself. As dusk approached, she felt an unsettling sensation, and with each passing evening the transformation took hold. Bimpi became a snake every night, slithering away into the forest to hide her monstrous form from the world, and most importantly, from Amara. Meanwhile, Amara, unaware of Bimpi's hidden curse, began to notice small signs of hope. Her body showed the early signs of pregnancy, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to believe that her dream might finally come true. Bimpi watched her friend's growing happiness with a bittersweet heart, relieved that her sacrifice was not in vain, but fearful of the secret she now carried. The change in Bimpi's behavior did not go unnoticed by Amara, but she attributed it to the stress of the years they had spent hoping and praying for a miracle. Bimpi's increasingly frequent evening disappearances were dismissed with flimsy excuses, chores, errands, the need for solitude, excuses that Amara accepted without question, her mind too occupied with the joy of impending motherhood. Bimpi, however, carried the weight of her secret alone, torn between the relief of seeing her friend's happiness and the dread of the curse that bound her every night. As the sun dipped below the horizon and twilight painted the village in shades of violet and gold, Bimpi would retreat to a secluded corner of the forest near her home. It was here, in the shadows of towering trees, that she underwent her daily transformation. The process was both painful and mesmerizing, a metamorphosis that started with an agonizing tingle that spread through her body, her skin rippling and shifting until she was no longer human, but a large, sinuous snake. Each evening, Bimpi endured the painful transformation alone. She coiled up in a hidden grove, surrounded by the whispering leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. As a snake, she could do little more than observe the world through slitted eyes and try to remain hidden. The nights were long, marked by an internal struggle to suppress her fear and discomfort while keeping the secret of her curse from Amara. Despite her daily agony, Bimpi was determined to maintain her facade. She spent the night hours slithering cautiously through the forest, avoiding any human contact and focusing on her sole goal, helping Amara. Her love for her friend kept her strong, even as her nights were marked by isolation and pain. Back in the village, Amara's life was undergoing a significant change. The ancient remedy had indeed worked. She was pregnant, and the joy of this news filled her days with a renewed sense of hope. The village buzzed with excitement as Amara's belly grew round and full, a symbol of the long-awaited miracle. The villagers celebrated with her, sharing in her happiness and anticipating the arrival of her child. However, as Amara's pregnancy progressed, she began to notice Bimpi's unusual behavior. Every evening, as dusk approached, Bimpi would make a hasty excuse to leave. She claimed to have urgent tasks or personal matters to attend to, but her frequent disappearances during the same time every day raised Amara's suspicions. Amara's growing curiosity led her to observe Bimpi more closely. She noticed how Bimpi's demeanor changed as the evening approached, her eyes flickering with a mix of guilt and nervousness. Despite her joy, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The pattern was too consistent to ignore, and Bimpi's increasing evasion only deepened her concern. One evening, as Amara watched Bimpi hurry away once more, she felt a pang of unease. Her mind raced with questions. Why was Bimpi so secretive, and what was she hiding? The joy of her pregnancy was overshadowed by a nagging worry, and Amara found herself increasingly preoccupied with the mystery surrounding her friend's behavior. Amara's unease grew as she continued to notice Bimpi's strange habits. She observed Bimpi's hurried and tense demeanor whenever evening approached. Each time Bimpi left, she would return with a look of exhaustion and distress, which Amara couldn't ignore. The joy of her pregnancy became marred by the persistent sense that something wasn't right. The village gossip also added to her concerns. Whispers about Bimpi's odd behavior and her sudden absences began to circulate, further fueling Amara's anxiety. Although she tried to dismiss these thoughts, they gnawed at her, making her increasingly restless. Amara's growing suspicion and concern eventually reached a tipping point. Driven by a mix of worry and curiosity, she decided to follow Bimpi one evening, hoping to uncover the truth behind her friend's mysterious departures. Little did she know that this decision would lead to a revelation that would forever alter their lives. The evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village. The air was cool and crisp as Amara prepared for another evening alone, her mind troubled by the mounting unease she felt about Bimpi's peculiar behavior. Despite the joy of her pregnancy, Amara's thoughts were increasingly consumed by questions about her friend's nightly absences. Tonight, Amara decided she could no longer ignore her growing suspicions. As the sun set and twilight crept in, she watched Bimpi from a distance, her gaze fixed on the familiar figure hurrying away from the village. Bimpi's movements were hurried and erratic, and Amara's concern hardened into resolve. With a deep breath and a heart pounding with anticipation, Amara quietly followed Bimpi, weaving through the dimly lit paths that led to the edge of the forest. The forest, cloaked in the veil of evening, seemed to breathe with an eerie calm. Amara navigated the underbrush as silently as possible, her eyes fixed on Bimpi's retreating form. The sounds of rustling leaves and distant animal calls filled the air, heightening her sense of urgency. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the familiar village sounds faded into an unsettling silence. Amara's heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination. She moved cautiously, her senses alert to every crackle of twigs and flutter of wings. She watched Bimpi stop near a secluded grove, where the shadows seemed to dance and twist ominously. From her hidden vantage point, Amara could barely make out the outline of her friend as she paused, looking around as if ensuring she was alone. As the final rays of daylight vanished, the transformation began. Amara's breath caught in her throat as she observed Bimpi's body start to shift and change. The transformation was both mesmerizing and horrifying. Bimpi's limbs elongated and coiled, her skin rippling and changing texture. What had once been a familiar, comforting figure now morphed into a large, sinuous serpent. Amara's eyes widened in shock as she saw Bimpi's face stretch and transform, the once warm eyes now replaced with cold reptilian slits. The process was grotesque and beautiful in its own way, the metamorphosis completed within moments. The snake, huge and imposing, slithered across the forest floor, its scales shimmering in the moonlight. Fear surged through Amara, overriding her rational thoughts. She had never imagined that her dear friend could harbor such a monstrous secret. Her body felt like lead as panic set in. The forest, which had once seemed so serene, now felt like a prison closing in around her. Her mind raced, struggling to comprehend the sight before her. Without a second thought, Amara turned and fled, her heart pounding and her breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest seemed to close in around her as she sprinted through the underbrush, branches scratching at her skin and shadows morphing into menacing shapes. The only sound she could focus on was the frantic thudding of her own footsteps and the occasional rustle behind her that hinted at the snake's pursuit. She burst from the forest, her legs nearly giving out as she reached the village. Her terror was palpable as she ran through the streets, desperately searching for someone to listen to her. The village square was dimly lit, with villagers gathered in quiet conversation. Amara, her voice hoarse with panic, shouted, "Help! Bimpy, she's a snake! I saw her turn into a huge snake in the forest." Her screams echoed through the night, drawing fearful looks and hushed whispers from the crowd. The chaos that followed was swift and overwhelming. The villagers, driven by fear and disbelief, began to mobilize. The chief was summoned, and the scene that unfolded was one of confusion and desperation. Amara's frantic recounting, fueled by fear and the urgency of her discovery, set the stage for the tragic events that would follow. As Amara stumbled into the village, her face was a mask of terror and disarray. Her clothes were torn from the brush, and her hair was wild, a stark contrast to the usually composed and serene demeanor she had once possessed. Her heart raced as she tried to catch her breath, her mind still reeling from the horrifying sight she had witnessed. The villagers gathered around, their curious eyes following her frantic movements. Amara's voice was a broken whisper, but she managed to choke out the words, "Bimpy, she's a snake, a huge snake." Her words tumbled out in a frenzied rush, her fear distorting the truth into something even more horrifying. I saw her in the forest. She was swallowing a child." The effect of Amara's statements was immediate and explosive. Gasps and murmurs erupted from the crowd, their fear quickly turning to outrage and panic. The idea of a child-eating snake roaming their forest was too terrifying to ignore. Amara's emotional state fueled the hysteria, her exaggerated claims only adding to the chaos. The once peaceful village was thrown into turmoil as whispers turned into cries of alarm. The village chief, an imposing figure of authority and wisdom, was summoned to address the situation. His stern face and authoritative presence quickly commanded the attention of the frightened villagers. Amara, still trembling and distraught, relayed her account in a disjointed, panicked manner. She spoke of Bimpy's transformation, her supposed predatory behavior, and the terror she had felt. The chief's eyes narrowed as he listened to Amara's account. His initial reaction was one of disbelief, but the combination of Amara's frantic demeanor and the escalating fear among the villagers left him with little choice. The chief's responsibility was to protect his people, and the threat described by Amara was one that could not be ignored. With a grave expression, the chief called for immediate action. He ordered the village guards to mobilize, their armor clinking and weapons gleaming in the dim light. The chief's decision was swift and decisive. They would venture into the forest to capture the alleged serpent and protect the village from this supposed menace. The guards, armed with nets and torches, moved out towards the forest with a mix of trepidation and determination. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of urgency and fear. As the villagers watched with bated breath, the chief's command to capture the child-eating snake was carried out, driven by the belief that their safety was at stake. The scene was chaotic, with villagers anxiously awaiting news of the guards' progress. The once familiar forest now seemed foreboding and dangerous, a place where myth and reality blurred in the face of panic. The chief's decision, based on Amara's fearful and exaggerated claims, set in motion a chain of events that would have profound and tragic consequences for all involved. As the guards ventured deeper into the forest, the anticipation and tension among the villagers mounted. They were on edge, their fear of the unknown magnified by the horrifying tales that Amara had spun. Little did they know that the truth was far more complex and heartbreaking than they could ever imagine. The night was thick with tension as the village guards, equipped with torches and large nets, made their way into the forest. The dense foliage seemed to close in around them, shadows dancing in the flickering torchlight. As they advanced cautiously, the air was filled with the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of twigs underfoot. Deep in the heart of the forest, Bimpi, still in her serpent form, lay coiled in her hidden grove. Her heart ached with a profound sadness as she felt the familiar pangs of transformation. She had hoped for this night to be different, for perhaps some peace, but instead, it became one of the most harrowing moments of her life. The sound of approaching footsteps and the clamor of the guards' voices caused her to tense, knowing that her secret was about to be revealed. The guards, guided by the frantic whispers and rumors that Amara had spread, soon found Bimpa. Their faces were a mix of fear and determination as they saw the enormous snake before them. The capture was swift and chaotic. The guards, despite their trepidation, acted with purpose, using the large nets to ensnare Bimpa. The net, designed to contain and restrain, enveloped her, its coarse fabric digging into her scaled skin. Bimpi struggled against the net, her powerful body writhing in an attempt to break free, but it was futile. Her heart was heavy with heartbreak and confusion, unable to comprehend how her sacrifice had led to such a dire fate. Her eyes, once filled with love and determination, were now filled with a profound sorrow as the guards, fearful but resolute, transported her back to the village. The journey back was agonizing for Bimpi. The pain of her restrained form, coupled with the emotional anguish of knowing she had failed in her quest to help her friend, made the trip unbearable. The village loomed ahead, and as Bimpe was dragged into the center of the village square, the atmosphere was thick with a grim sense of anticipation. The dawn of the next day broke with an uneasy calm, the village square filled with murmurs of excitement and dread. Villagers gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension, as the chief prepared to address the situation. The capture of the monster had been a major event, and the villagers were eager to see what the morning would bring. Bimpi, now back in her human form, stood before the assembly in the village square. Her transformation back to human had left her weak and disoriented. The restraints that bound her were a stark reminder of her captivity, and her appearance, disheveled and tear-streaked, spoke volumes of her distress. The once beautiful girl now appeared broken and hollow, her eyes red from the tears she had shed and the suffering she had endured. The chief, with a stern face and a voice that brooked no dissent, addressed the crowd. Bimpe was accused of being a monster and a threat to the village. The villagers' fear was palpable as they listened to the charges laid out against her. The trial was not one of justice, but of swift judgment, fueled by fear and misinformation. As Bimpi was questioned, her responses were drowned out by the loud voices of the villagers. They called for her punishment, their fear overriding any sense of compassion. The accusations of child eating were repeated, each word a dagger to Bimpi's already shattered heart. Amara, who had initially been in the crowd, was called forward. Her demeanor had changed from the frantic woman of the previous night to a more composed, though still visibly distressed figure. The emotional exchange between Amara and Bimpi was heart-wrenching. Bimpi's eyes sought Amara's, a silent plea for understanding and forgiveness. The bond they had shared was evident in the brief, sorrowful moments when their gazes met. Amara's face, however, was a mask of regret and confusion, unable to reconcile the friend she once knew with the creature now accused of such heinous acts. Amara's role in the trial was complicated by her guilt and fear. She struggled to face Bimpy, knowing that her actions had set this tragic course in motion. Yet the weight of her own fear and the pressure from the villagers clouded her judgment, leading her to remain silent on the true nature of Bimpy's sacrifice. As the trial progressed, it became clear that Bimpy's fate was sealed. The emotional and psychological toll of the mourning was heavy, with Bimpy's silent agony contrasting sharply with the loud accusations and the crowd's growing outrage. The scene set the stage for the tragic conclusion that awaited Bimpy, marking the end of a heartbreaking chapter in the lives of both friends.